Hi everyone, it's Al, and I'm presenting arrays and array lists from AP Computer Science. An array is a data structure that acts as a fixed size list. Every component of the list must be of the same type, whether it be a primitive data type or object. This means that it can be any type. So it can be an integer, double, string, boolean, or even a class object, as long as they're all the same type. And each component of the list has an ID called an index. This index gives it an order in the array. It can also be used to access the components of the array. Since arrays are objects, they use the keyword new. Keep in mind, since they are objects, they also follow the other rules from objects, which means that they are passed by reference instead of value. This means that if you were to pass an array to a function to be altered, it would change the actual array and not create a copy of it. Specific contents of the array can be accessed with brackets and an integer representing the index, and the amount of contents in the array can be found using .length. So this code segment was used to show the properties of arrays. So in 1D arrays, this is how they are initialized. There are two different ways to initialize it. You can, for both methods, you have to use the type and then brackets to indicate that it's an array, and then the name. Then for the first method, use equals new string or whatever type, and the number of contents in the array. For mine, I want it to have 5 different contents. The other way would just be listing all the values inside the array. And these values are separated by commas. Spaces are optional, and it can also end with a comma, which is optional. To change values inside of an array, you use brackets and the integer representing the index. You use the same notation to access the value. For example, inside a print statement, I could say my array dot 3 or brackets 3 and get high, but if I put 4, I would get the default value for strings because no value had been set to 4, and I'll get null. The same applies to these values in this array. Now for 2D arrays. A 2D array is an array of arrays. They are similar to 1D arrays, but to access specific contents, they use 2 sets of brackets, and one to represent which array to look in, and the other to represent what the index in that array is. The first bracket usually refers to a row number and the second to columns to make a rectangular matrix. And if you only use the first bracket, then you can access the entire row. Let's see this in practice. So here I have an array with double brackets, and it's called chessboard. And I initialize it as an 8x8 2D array. and each of these values are empty. So if I were to print chessboard for 4, I should get 0, right? But if I were to get only the first bracket, I would get the entire row. Instead I get the address for that array, because it is an array of arrays, and arrays are objects. So I get the address of the array at that row. And now I have another example. This time I filled in values, and I call this array, this 2D array, bowling. And these have differing values for each row. So if I were to write bowling 2 and 2, I should get 7. Actually, not. If I were to write bowling 1 and 2, I should get 7. Because it is the second row and the third column. Because you add 1 to each of these indexes, and I get 7. But if I were to write just the row, I get another address. Now for array lists. An array list is another type of list, similar to an array but different because it can have variable lengths. This means that you can change the length of array lists while the code is running, instead of having a fixed value that's set at the beginning. Additions can be made to array lists at any time, and you can also delete and change contents. Array lists are initialized differently, and they have functions associated with them. .set, add, remove, size, and get. Size is the equivalent of arrays.length that is used for array lists, and .get does the same thing that brackets would do, but you cannot use brackets with array lists. So here I initialized an array list called myArrayList is equal to new array list integer. And as you can see, it uses a wrapper class instead of calling it a regular double or string. It uses the wrapper class, which is denoted with these triangular black brackets, and they're also objects. And to create an array list's values, you would use the .add function, and it takes a parameter of what you want to add, and it has to be the same type as the type you initialized the array list with. There's a difference in the function here, because if you add 2 parameters, and the first one is an integer, you can choose where to add in the array list. So if I put 0, it will add it to the beginning of an array list, and it will add the value 3. So now if I print my array list.get 0, I get 3 because this was added at the beginning. But if I were to remove 0, then this is gone, and these two would be moved down to fill its place. So now I get 5 because 5 moved down since the first one here was removed. Yeah, there's also set, and I have to add a second parameter to change its value. The first one is the index. If I change it to 9, and I get 9. To get the size of the array list, I use size. And you can see there's 3 different objects in the array list. And that includes array lists. One thing I want to mention is that you can use classes as type for both arrays and array lists. So if I use the class boxes, as I did here, I made an array list of objects from the boxes class. So I made the array list 2 objects long. The array 2 objects long. And I set the first value equal to a new object. And I initialized a new object called boxes. Actually, it has no name, but it uses the class boxes with the parameter 5. And now if I print my boxes 0, and remove this. Again, address boxes, because this is an object from boxes. And if I do 1, I get null because there is no object initialized for boxes 2. You can see here I made a new object for boxes 0. So boxes 1 doesn't have anything there yet. But if I write boxes 0 dot get weight, which is a function I added here to return the weight inside, I'll get 5, which is the same number I used to initialize the object inside the array. That concludes the lesson on arrays and array lists, and I'll go on to the questions. Now I'll be going over the multiple choice questions on arrays and array lists. Question 1 says, which of the following correctly initializes an array to contain 4 elements, each with value 0? The answer would be all of them, because this one initializes them directly, putting all the values. This one initializes 4 elements with the default values because no values had been added, but the default value is 0, so this works as well. And this initializes 4 elements with the default value 0, and then for each one of them, using a for loop, changes all the values to 0. So all 3 of these work because in the end they all have 4 elements and each of them are 0. So the answer is E. The next question says the following program segment is intended to find the index of the first negative integer in this array, where array is an array of n integers. This code segment will work as intended whenever array contains at least 1 negative integer. This is because if there's no negative integers, it'll keep going until this becomes a number higher than the maximum number of elements in the array. because if this is initialized as a number and this index is higher than the initialized number of elements in the array, then it'll give an array out of bounds error. 3 says, which of the following will be the result of executing the code segment? E is the answer. A runtime error will occur because when I has a value array length minus 1, it is incremented to array length in the loop. So it will be out of the bounds and cause an error. 4 says, if array initially contains the elements, these elements in this order, what will array 2 contain after execution of the code segment? And the answer would be A, because this code segment removes all the zeros and copies the non-zero elements and then transfers them to array 2. This question asks, what is the maximum number of times that small can be printed in this code segment? And the answer is C, k minus 2, because small will be printed on each iteration of the for loop, and there are k minus 1 iterations. So it will be printed k minus 1 times. 6s, what will be the output from the following code segment, assuming it is in the same class as the do something method? The answer is C, because array is changed by do something. So by calling this method, the contents of array is changed in this method since it passes the reference. So it ends up being 0 and 0. 7 asks, consider writing a program that reads the lines of any text file into a sequential list of lines. Which of the following is a good reason to implement the list with an array list of string objects rather than array of string objects? The answer is D, because the array list can automatically be resized. Array lists can change size while the code segment is running, while arrays cannot. So if the array goes out of bounds, then an error will occur, and that is not what you want. So D is the correct answer. A asks, consider writing a program that produces statistics for a long list of numerical data. Which of the following is the best reason to implement each list with an array int rather than an array list of integer objects? The answer to this question is A, because in order for numerical elements to be added to an array list, each element must be wrapped using a wrapper class and then inserted into the list. So an array of primitive numbers is more efficient to manipulate than an array list of wrapper objects that contains numbers. Question 9 refers to this code segment and says, which is the correct line for line of code here? And the correct answer would be D, because this enhanced for loop uses A to represent all of the objects in the list, and using the function you can get the names. Which of the following is a correct replacement for more code? The answer would be B, to only, because since the address class does not have a toString method, you have to print each part, every piece of data that you want out of the object. Which is the correct replacement for a code to print lists of names in this code segment? The correct answer would be C, because each student must be accessed through the getName accessor. Since student.getAddress gives the address of the student, you have to use name through getName. So the answer is C. Number 12 says, which of the following could replace method body so that the method works as intended? The answer is E, because both 2 and 3 work. They don't lose the student who has the highest ID number. Segment 2 stores a reference to the student, and student 3 stores an array index of the student. But the first one returns the first student whose ID number is greater than max, but not the highest. So the answer is E. Question 13 refers to that code segment. It says, which of the following correctly replaces more code in the transaction constructor to initialize tick list array? And the answer would be B, because for each iteration, tick list of I is another object that must be constructed. So C, D, and E would be wrong because they don't initialize new objects correctly. And A is wrong because the methods it uses are already accessors for objects that are already supposed to be created, which doesn't work because you're creating new objects. So the answer is B. Which of the following represents the code to calculate amount in the total paid method? The answer is C, because to get the price for each ticket, you have to use the getPrice accessor, since price is private. So A and E is wrong. B has a typo. B uses tick list instead of T. And D and E create a transaction object, don't fully create it. So this is a null pointer. So the answer would be C. 15 says, suppose it is necessary to keep a list of all tickets. A suitable declaration would be, the answer would be A, because you have to use numsales with the transaction constructor in his array using transaction in both the type and the constructor. 16 says the code segment is intended to find the smallest value. So it says for the segment to work as intended, which modifications could be made. So B, changes the body of the while loop. To make it so array 1 is tested, and to fix the array out of bounds error. And part 2 does both of these things. So the answer is B. 17 says, assuming the method has not been exited, which assertion is true at the end of every execution of the while loop? The answer is A, because V index and W index is incremented at the end of the loop. So when the loop is exited, those values have not been used yet. And they have not been compared. So V index equals N or W index equals M. Question 18 says, suppose book list is initialized so that each book in the list has a title, author, or checkout. Which is true about this code? The answer is B, which says each book in the booklet array will have its checkout status changed as intended. This is because objects in an array can be changed in a loop using the mutator methods. Question 19 says, which of the following is the correct replacement for declare array of bingo card in the code segment? The correct answer is D, because the declaration has to have the type value, which is bingo card. So A and E is incorrect since they use int. Choice C is incorrect because the number of the slots should be num players instead of 20. And the answer is D, because you cannot use int as a constructor for num players. It has to use the objects from the class. So the answer is D. 20 says, assuming players has been declared as an array of bingo card, which of the following is the correct replacement for construct each bingo card? The answer would be C. Segment 3 is the only one that works, because the for loop should not be used to replace elements. The for each loop, or the enhanced for loop. This is because the enhanced for loop, the enhanced for loop can't change values because it takes the elements of an array as its value instead of referring to it. So this doesn't change the actual value inside the array. So the answer would be C. 21 says, which declaration will cause an error? The correct answer is B, because the type parameter in array list must be a class type. B says 2 only. Int is not a suitable wrapper class. It should be integer with capital I, and this gives an error. 22 says, consider these declarations. Which statement will cause an error? The correct answer is E, because all these elements must be strings. And since neither of these are strings, then it'll cause an error. This becomes a string because even though it's adding 8, ch, the variable, is a string, so it prints, it behaves as a string. 23 says, let list be an array list of integers containing these elements. Which of the following statements would not cause an error to occur? The only one that works would be C, because A, D, and E will all cause index out of bounds exception, and C does not change anything, does not cause an error. 24 says, assuming that the type of element is compatible with the objects in the list, which is true about insert. The answer would be D. It fails if element is smaller than the last item in list and works in all the cases. Because if the element is smaller than the last item in the list, it's compared to everything in the list, and the index will be increased until it gives an out of bounds error. 25 says, consider the following code segment, and if list is initially 618, what will be the following execution of the code segment? So the answer to this would be A, because when using the add function, it changes the position of all objects after starting at the index. And the set function replaces the element instead of shifting the other ones. Question 26 says, here is the getTotal method from the purse class. Which of the following is a correct replacement for more code? The only correct answer would be E, because the value of each coin must be obtained with c.getValue, but enhanced for loops in the enhanced for loops, A and B don't work because the loop accesses each coin in the array list, which means that there should not be any attempts to get the next coin. '27 says, which is a correct replacement for code define match? The correct answer would be D, because the equals method is used for objects only, and getValue gives a double, so c.getValue and acoin.getValue can only be compared using the double equal sign operator, or another function for dot equals must be defined for it. Which of the following initializes an 8 times 10 matrix with integer values that are perfect squares? The correct answer is D, 1 and 2. And 2 is the most obvious answer because it uses a method to create perfect squares by squaring integers. But 1 works as well because it says 0 is a perfect square and all the values in the matrix that he creates are 0. 3, however, does not work. So the answer is D. Consider a class that has this private instance variable, private int mat. alter 1 will change mat 2. The correct answer would be A. The method alter changes all the columns, starting at C plus 1, and it overwrites column C. So after running this, it'll create this. Question 30 says, after the call mat stuff, matrix mat will be. The correct answer is A, because mat stuff uses the row parameter to overwrite each element in that row. So that means the third row is overridden, because 2 refers to the third row, because 0, 1, 2, and this row is overridden, and it would give you A. 31 says, what does the following code segment do? And the correct answer is B, reflects the mat through its minor diagonal, because it swaps mat 0, 0 with mat 1, 1 and goes down the list, which suggests choice B. Number 32 says, the method does not work as intended. Which of the following changes will correct the problem? The correct answer would be D. 1 and 2 can both correct the problem. This is because the original method will give an array out of bounds exception error. So by making either 1 or 2 as adjustments, it will correct this error and fix the code segment, while 3 does not fix this error. Number 33 says, which of the following conditions on a matrix of the type declared on the code segment will guarantee that this statement will have the value true when evaluated? The answer is B, 3 only, because for the method, the code counts how many times a $sign appears in row 2 and how many times in column 2, and only returns true if the amount of times it appears is equal to the size for either the row or the column. So 1 and 2 are both incorrect, and B is the only correct answer. 34 says, segment, which of the following is a replacement for code? And the answer is D, because D says 1 and 2 are both correct replacements, because segment 1 travels row by row, and segment 2 travels column by column, and they each do the same thing, but they do it using different orders. But segment 3 does not alter the array at all. It changes the local variable element in the enhanced for loop, which cannot be used to change the elements. Which of the following is a correct replacement for more code so that the post condition for the method is satisfied? The correct answer would be E, which is 2 and 3. The reason is because there are 365 days in a year, so the divisor must be 365. 36 says the method change negs replaces every point that has at least one negative coordinate. Which is the correct replacement for code? The correct answer is E, which says 1, 2, and 3. All of these are correct answers because they all achieve the post conditions. (37) is the final question. It says, which segment represents a correct replacement for more code for the toString method? The correct answer is E. This code segment works because in order for it to work, it must have an opening boundary line, must add a symbol in each square, and then close the boundary line and go to the next line. So the only code segment that properly achieves all three of these tasks is the last one, E. So that is the right answer. That concludes the questions for arrays and array lists.